Welcome to the Demonstrating Implementation Excellence stream at the SNOMED CT Expo 2022. My name is Linda Bird and I am the Implementation Support Lead here at SNOMED International. I will be moderating today's session. All questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation. Online attendees, please use the Q&A box to type your questions to the presenter, and on-site attendees, please use the microphone provided. I'm now very pleased to introduce Dion McMurtrie from CSIRO, who will be presenting prototype dm+d implementation of the SNOMED International drug model. Please proceed, Dion.
Thank you. So look, I'll apologise in advance. This will be probably quite a whirlwind and quite quick because there's a lot to cover. It'll be an overview. I also want to acknowledge, obviously, Joe Goulding and Matt Cordell, who unfortunately can't be here, but were a big part of this work, and actually the NHS Digital and NHS BSA teams as well. Unfortunately, I can't advance. Well, maybe it'll make it a shorter presentation. Okay. So look, I'll first introduce what we were trying to do, what problem we were trying to solve. So the UK, for those who don't understand or don't know, I didn't really. There's a thing called dm+d, which is has existed for a long time, or maybe I should say dm+d. Which is an XML-based distribution heavily implemented in prescribed dispense in EPS solutions in the UK, particularly community-based, less so in the acute setting. And the problem really is at the moment that there's that, and there's also a UK drug extension at the moment in the UK's SNOMED extension. And those things are published at different times. The UK drug extension has to be manually, is part automated from dm+d, and also partly requires some manual work, which means that they lag each other in time. And there's also a number of references that dm+d makes to an active content, and I can explain later why. And that means that there's these sort of different states being represented by dm+d and the UK drug extension at any given point in time. And that's obviously not ideal and creates implementation issues. And obviously also the drug extension is not fully defined at the moment. It's just a primitive hierarchy. That means that there is a bunch of work to do to sort of parent new concepts as well, because the classifier can't do that for anyone. So the aim is really to try to improve the overall efficiency and quality of that process, and make it easier to maintain the drug extension in sync with dm+d as two products that work seamlessly together. We also were trying to update the drug extension to be able to be classified. So might as well use the SNOMED drug extension model. So applied that, and then obviously go through a classifier and try to use the ECL features and file terminology services APIs. So that was sort of the objective. This is kind of an indication of the state of play of dm+d and the UK drug extension and SNOMED. So they're sort of overlapping or heavily overlapping. This isn't to scale of the overlap, but it's meant to indicate that there is content that's unique to the drug extension that isn't in SNOMED CT International, but it's also not in dm+d. So that's why it's not possible to generate the UK drug extension from dm+d at the moment. We won't go into all of the gory details of all the various bits of it. Unfortunately, we don't have time. So in terms of the objective as well, obviously the dm+d is heavily implemented. We had to come up with a way of making the dm+d be a sufficient source of truth to be able to forward generate the drug extension so that there was no human interaction there. So that meant that dm+d needed to be enhanced to include this extra information. And that needs to be done in a backwardly compatible way so that these were bolt-on changes that didn't affect existing implementation. We're also, another objective was trying to align to the international drug model as much as we could, and content. And then there was also that issue of the existing inactive concepts and activation of concepts coming from SNOMED International, and how they have quite a lot of impact on the electronic prescribing systems in the UK. So methods for how to insulate from that and deal with that problem. So I think also probably, I mean, I won't go through all of these. Also, another interesting thing was the representation of these non-defining properties that at the moment were relationships of the primitive concepts that were defined in for the drug extension, but and are quite high value, but obviously aren't part of the definition. So we wanted to resolve how we could deal with those. I've lost the clicky thing again. So this was effectively the objective, right? So we wanted to make the UK drug extension sit wholly within dm+d and SNOMED and not have any unique parts, which meant that we could generate the drug extension from dm+d, and it would obviously pick up a bunch of things from SNOMED International, and that way it would be an automatable target. So the process, this is essentially what we did. We took dm+d, we ran that through a process to create an enhanced version of dm+d. We actually used the UK drug extension to get those missing properties and push them back into dm+d. And then it pretended that enhanced version of dm+d is dm+d and used that to then forward generate the UK drug extension models changed into the SNOMED International edition. And we used the July 2021 edition because that was what lined up with the drug extension and dm+d at the time. Generated an R2 stated forms, our axioms, ran that through SNOMED International's L toolkit, obviously producing an R2 NNF that we could then load into Onto server, and you could browse it from Shrimp and use ECL against it and that kind of thing to see what the effect was and what how it worked. So in terms of the enhancements to dm+d, there were some sort of bolt-on sort of structural enhancements. So there were things like trade family and trade family group that are unique to the drug extension that aren't in dm+d. So that was one of the bigger bits of content. There's also and that was considered to be maybe actually useful to some implementers now, and it just isn't present in dm+d at the moment. Another one was, as an example, is things like ingredient modifications. So if dm+d introduces an ingredient that's actually not an ingredient from SNOMED International, then we need to be able to generate that correctly into the extension, and we need to know more about it. And there's other examples like that. There's also this whole idea of some versus only was also problematic. There's no sort of explicit statement in dm+d about which one it is, although you can infer from the hierarchy that it's mostly talking about only semantics. That said, there were examples where it wasn't from the hierarchical relationships, which are stated, so they were in intention. So it does create a bit of a mixture. That's also a bit blurry because a number of those concepts that it's referring to are in the international edition. They sometimes were concepts that came from dm+d originally and were promoted into the international edition, and then they were subsequently clarified by the international edition as being either some or only, mostly at the VTM, VMP or MP level. They were clarified as some, which was a bit different to the original intention of the UK content. So that was quite problematic. So we had to, where that was happening, had to create new sort of VTM concepts that matched the only semantics that they actually wanted, and manipulate those over from the international content. Otherwise, the classification was incorrect. So, sorry, the clicker thing has died again. Pharmaceutical dose forms were also a bit of an issue. So dm+d mostly at the moment has dose forms that don't include the root in them, whereas the international content, particularly MPF and clinical drug, do employ root. So oral, conventional release oral tablet instead of just tablet. So there's quite a lot of that needed to be worked around. And that means that, you know, the things diverge at that medicinal product form level, which is actually quite high in the overall hierarchy. And then there was the VMPs that reference the international concepts. Some of those are international concepts. There was a number of them that are in the UK drug extension. They have additional relationships and things applied to them, which actually narrows their meaning. So they're not really the same concept, which is probably not right. So those needed to be replaced as well. And there's a whole series of other things we identified as part of this process, which we just didn't have, unfortunately, time to implement. So I won't go through those, but there's some interesting things there too. So in terms of the capabilities, benefits, this is just indicating the percentages of these various hierarchies in dm+d, which goes from the left to the right, is going from the top of the hierarchy down, and shows that quite a lot of it was able to be fully defined. You can tell the difference there is indicating whether it was all of the content in dm+d, which includes devices as well, versus just the medicines content. So it was much higher for the medicines content in some of those areas. The kinds of capabilities we got. So obviously things like the bit of ECL at the top, which is selecting out an injection that's being selected from the VMP reference set out of dm+d. And I guess this is important because that's ring-fencing just the piece that's relevant to the drug extension. Obviously, there's other content in SNOMED International that comes internationally from clinical drug that doesn't exist in the UK and isn't relevant. So that's why that's happening. But you can do other interesting things, like we used licensed route. Obviously not a defining characteristic of the product, but still really quite useful and interesting. So you can do something like, tell me what are the licensed routes for this particular product, and that's the list that you get. And then you can select that and say, well, show me all of the actual products, the branded, traded products that are a type of this generic thing that are licensed for that particular route, and you get the particular products. So using the defining and the non-defining properties in ECL and mix is quite useful. Clicker's going good. This is another example, really just showing that the concrete domains obviously are in there, and you can do interesting things like asking about things that have a strength greater than 1 milligram. In this example, the clicker thing. There we go. And then this shows, this is obviously using fire, but you end up with this representation coming out. You can see we've got again, a concrete domain value that's coming out for, in this case, a tariff. So you can, again, use that in ECL. It comes out in the fire representation as well automatically as properties. So there's a lot of advantage in putting these non-defining properties in as just effectively non-defining relationships, and we had this discussion at the advisory groups the other day, so it's quite powerful. Okay, so barriers and obstacles, there were quite a few. So and I'll try and go quickly through these to give you an overview. But dm+d, one of the things that was difficult about dm+d is it, as I said, it's got things like drugs, but it's also got devices and foods and cosmetics, and trying to figure out of dm+d which thing is one of which, because they need to go into different hierarchies in SNOMED was a challenge, and that needs to be addressed. There's some products with incomplete product data in dm+d, but so where if you were to define it using and classify it using the content that is present in dm+d, you'd actually get an incorrect classification because there's missing attributes, there's missing data, maybe missing ingredients, for example. But there's no way to tell that from looking at dm+d whether the product's actually modeled completely or incompletely. So there's things like that are going on. The UK drug extension, it had no existing stated form, and it obviously there was that mixture of basic dose forms versus the pharmaceutical dose forms, which imply route, as I mentioned before. There's a big difference, which is whether we're talking about the manufactured or the dispensed dose form, which, dm+d was all based on the dispensed dose form. The international content's all the manufactured dose form. So there's quite a big division there, and again affects interoperability all the way up at that medicinal product form level. And then with the international model, there's things like some of the forms are very specific, and there's no generalized form of those forms. So when you're sort of forced into picking a very route specific form, and you don't get the subsumption you want unless you're very precise, and yet maybe that precision doesn't exist in the extension and the extension data. So that's an issue. Manufactured dispense forms, rules for replicating unit of presentation the way that it exists in the international content. There's some general guidance. I'll get onto another slide, but there isn't anything concrete to be able to do that. And obviously that affects classification too. Specific dose denominator units as well, which I think I've got another slide on. So I'll come into some of these examples. So unit of presentation, was a challenge because dm+d has a similar sort of idea, and even between what was considered to be a discrete versus a continuous product, but it didn't match what is considered to be the same thing in the international content. And it interestingly doesn't entirely align with what AMT thinks of these things as well. All of that suggests to me that that's a kind of jurisdictionally important piece of information, but it isn't defining of the thing. And that because we're varying across jurisdictions when we're talking about the same thing. So I suspect that's what's happening there. But even if you could sort of bend dm+d's view of what these things are to what the international model and content is, you can't replicate it anyway because there isn't enough information to systematically implement whatever's happening in the international content. So there's definitely issues there. Cool. So this is an example as well of where it also creates other confusions as to when things are, a unit of presentation of an intimate container at that sort of clinical drug level, or when they're a packaged thing. So here's two paracetamol liquids. One's considered to be the modeled clinical drug equivalent is the solution that's inside the bottle, and the bottle isn't talked about. The bottle's considered packaging. The other one is, the unit of presentation is the bottle, and so the bottle is talked about at the clinical drug level. But they're both solutions of paracetamol, and so there doesn't seem to be a systematic way of deciding when these things are one or the other. This is another issue with the international content sort of being quite specific. So the thing on the left is modeling 500 milligrams per capsule, specifically saying that, and the other on the right is saying 500 per tablet. So to classify those are different strengths. They're not the same strength, whereas obviously to a human they're both 500 milligrams. And this is another problem that causes issues with the classification. Sorry, I've lost my clicker again. So this one is really showing, inconsistent strengths. So you can see here on the left, we've got a fentanyl product, a lozenge that's represented in the modeling. It doesn't really matter what's happening in the descriptions. We're worried about the modeling, which is what the classifier sees. It's 1.2 milligrams on the left-hand side. The other one is 200 micrograms. And again, the classifier can't sort of reason with these things because they're different. It doesn't do any unit conversions. It also affects ECL. So if I was to say, show me all of the things with more than 100 milligrams of micrograms of fentanyl, I'd get the thing on the right and I wouldn't get the thing on the left out of the ECL. So that's also a barrier. So making those consistent, and there's rules in things like AMT and dm+d for consistently using units to make this problem go away. So this is essentially the model that we used, which is essentially the international drug model with dm+d mapped into it. So sort of VTM looks like medicinal product, but it's, well, I suppose medicinal product only most of the time. Sometimes it's not. That's also an interesting thing. And then we had, clinical drugs and packaged clinical drugs, and even down to sort of the sub-packaging, composite packs, and then the branded stuff on the other side with real clinical drug and the equivalents. And then there's these additional, non-defining properties that were also added on as well. So this is a result. So these on the right-hand side are proportional of the actual subsumption that happened when classifying after quite a lot of effort to make them align. So you can see at the NP level, there's quite a big intersection between dm+d and or the drug extension in the international content. At the medicinal product form level, that starts to fall away quite a bit because of the issues we've described. And then at the clinical drug level, it falls away quite a lot. So there isn't a great intersection there. And it's interesting because some of the products in dm+d, some of that intersection is dm+d directly referring to clinical drug concepts from the international edition. So some of them we're getting quite cheaply. So we're really not getting much subsumption. So yeah, integration and subsumption at clinical drug does feel appealing, but it's actually quite hard. It comes with quite a cost. It would, to get it to work the way that the international model currently is and the content currently is, would take a lot of compromise from dm+d's changing its semantics essentially to match up and model that. And adds quite a lot of, I guess, additional complexities that dm+d currently doesn't have, and yet still sort of achieves what it needs to achieve. So that would be a kind of a hard sell. The medicinal product integration is actually quite easy, but it also delivers a lot. So you get quite a lot of additional inferences and things from that, which is really good. So it effectively leaves a decision point for the UK and then probably for us in Australia as well, which is how much do we try to seek to compromise on the drug extensions that exist now that are achieving their goals, and change those, or try to work with SNOMED International to get the international model and content changed, or just accept that the integration happens just at the medicinal product level and not worry about the integration lower down, and because we're getting enough from that. So I've got the okay. So this slide is really just talking about, again, from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, there's options there for how dependent on the international content dm+d or the drug extension in the UK wants to be. So, the purple things at the bottom are indicating that, they could just define just the trade side concepts and directly reference international concepts for those high levels, VMP and VTM that dm+d refers to. There's sort of a bit of a middle ground that they could go for, or they could effectively continue to model all of those concepts at that same level and have kind of British equivalents of existing international concepts and just subsume underneath that, which gives them, a bit of insulation. So this last slide, the next steps. This is kind of what the UK have decided to do. The NHS are going forward with. They are going to try to, or they are going through a program of making dm+d bigger in scope so that it can be the source of truth, so you can automate the UK drug extension of it. So they're going to do that. They're also going to put in some effort to insulate dm+d from changes to the international content, but because that burnt them badly and still does to today. So they're going to have those extension concepts themselves and rely internally on extension concepts that are subsumed by international concepts, but not use those international concepts directly in case they get changed on them again. And then they do intend to align with the international model as far as they can, but there's obviously compromises that they just aren't prepared to make. So that will probably leave them integrated at that medicinal product level and maybe not much more at the moment. That's pretty much it.
Thanks very much, Dion. We probably have time for one quick question. If you're in the room, would like to ask a question, could you please use the microphone?
I'm Dr. Ramamurthy. Thank you for an excellent presentation. One of your slides in which you had compared, it showed as though the international drug model is not robust enough or not strong enough. International drug model is extremely good. You were saying that maybe you have problems with the dose form, unit of strength and all that. I think maybe you may like to have a really good international drug model is very good.
Thanks very much. I think we're out of time. So with that, we will conclude this session. Thank you very much, Dion.
No worries.
Online delegates can join another session through the event lobby, and on-site delegates, you're welcome to stay here for the next session. Thank you.